Jam-packed Terminal 1 at San Diego International Airport is a step closer to getting a $3 billion makeover. Building affordable and denser housing may become mandatory for California cities as the legislature resurrects Senate Bill 50. And San Diego's transit cops ticket far more fare evaders than other cities amid worries about how these citations affect the working poor. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Lori Weisberg, who covers tourism and marketing for the San Diego Union-Tribune. Joshua Emerson Smith, who covers the environment and transportation, also for the Union-Tribune. And KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Well, more than half-century has passed since Terminal 1 was built at Lindbergh Field. It's become more and more crowded over the years, with Southwest Airlines currently the biggest user. Now a planned $3 billion overhaul has overcome a critical hurdle. More battles await, but airport officials are hopeful a new terminal with 11 additional gates, greatly improved transit, and far greater passenger capacity, say that 3 times, is coming in the next 5 years or so. So Lori, huge project here. Where does it stand now compared with just a year ago?
So a year ago, they were hoping to be at the point they are now, but they, so that this hurdle that we're talking about was passing the San Diego Airport Authority Board of Directors. But getting there took a year because they had released their preliminary environmental impact report back then, and there was a chorus of negativity from all the surrounding agencies about that EIR because all the different agencies felt that the airport was very dismissive of the kind of traffic congestion that would come with more passengers coming to Lindbergh Field, that they weren't doing enough to address it. The airport authority listened, they rewrote their EIR, and they made some changes to address that. And so when you got to this recent vote, there was no opposition from these agencies. And I guess I should mention what one of the key things they did was they saved space for and agreed to fund a future transit station that would serve both Terminals 1 and 2.
All right, we're going to get into some of those details. We'll start with it. I mean, the upgrades, this is a big project, as I said, a huge overhaul.
It's basically, they're going to demolish, eventually, they're going to demolish the current Terminal 1, which was built in 1967, very dated, very old. And they're going to replace it with a whole new, larger terminal that will have a total of 30 gates. There's 19 now, and there'll be bigger gates than the 19 that we see now today.
Yeah, and you mentioned the problem and how they address some of that now, but there's new aspects for getting to and from the airport, vehicle and public transit, big changes around the airport.
Well, so the public transit getting there is still a big open question. Various agencies for the last several months are meeting. They're actually doing modeling studies right now to see could there be a people mover or an extension of the trolley to get to the, and would it be an aerial trolley? I mean, excuse me, an aerial people mover, underground,
hot air balloons,
surface, yeah, gondola. No. So that's the still open question, and that's why I mentioned this transit station that would serve whatever option they ultimately pick. But they are going to do an electric shuttle free from Old Town Transit Station in the interim to the airport. And they're also going to pay for a new 3-lane road that would take about 45, to get into the airport, that would take about 45,000 cars a day off of Harbor Drive. So that's one of the other expenditures as part of this plan.
Right. One of the plans is that MTS would extend the Metropolitan Transit System would extend its trolley to the airport, right?
But which is still an open question. They're still deciding. They're going to come back with all these very detailed studies to see, does the trolley extension make more sense, or does the people mover make more sense? So it's not a decided issue
right.
yet.
So like MTS could extend the trolley to the airport, or the San Diego Association of Governments has this idea to build the big San Diego Grand Central that would somehow connect to the airport. But both of those things are contingent on getting a sales tax measure passed. What is the airport say about that? Like, maybe it won't happen,
it's
right?
It's probably less about what is the airport authority, but it's more Sandag, and you know the the head of Sandag, he's been pushing really hard on this.
Right.
I mean, he's told me that it could be like a $4 billion project. I don't know. You know, you're right. It's going to require a sales tax increase. He's hopeful,
right.
But I mean, that is a big question mark. You're right. I mean, we've seen LAX. They're doing it right now. They're building it.
That's right.
And they were able to get funding. The airport authority needs, if they were to spend more money of their own, they need the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, to let them spend money that could potentially be off airport for the people mover.
And
but again, that is a big question mark, and I think people are right to be skeptical of whether that's really going to happen.
Yeah, that gets to how we said there's plenty of hurdles yet to come. Well, you've segued nicely into my next question, the price tag here. Denver Airport, which opened in 1995, cost $4.8 billion, was the most expensive ever. That'd be $8 billion plus in today's dollars. Still $3 billion or so seems like a lot for an expansion project. Where's the money coming from?
And I should mention, I mean, obviously it's more than just the Terminal 1. It's that roadway. Oh, they're adding another taxiway. They're building a whole new administration building. So there's other components of the project
just the one terminal.
that add, yeah. And the money is pretty much coming from largely from the fees that the airlines, all of the airlines pay to rent the terminal space, concessions, parking fees, but the bulk of the money is all coming from the fees that the airport authority collects.
Okay, so they bought into it, and that's hopefully going to underwrite the whole thing, at least the airport aspect of it.
That's the hope.
Now, lots of opposition remains to expanding Lindbergh's capacity, increasing passenger traffic, and I think, if I recall, the numbers from your story, we've been several record years in a row, up to about 25 million passengers.
Right,
this might push it to 40
million. It could be by 2035. So we are, as you know, a single runway airport, so it's self-limiting. So when they reach 40 million, they can't keep allowing more passengers. So they can only schedule so many flights. They tell me that one way to balance it out is that there's certain times of the day now when there's much more congestion at the airport. They're going to have to schedule flights more evenly throughout the day. But it is what it is. It's one runway, and they can't, get up to 50 million, 60 million passengers because the airport can't accommodate it.
Well, in order to do that, you talk about half centuries or more. We've been talking about a new airport, a different airport, a real modern, in a different spot. We've been talking about that for at least a half century. Maybe we'll be talking about another. But I mean, at that point, you're talking about a second airport, or maybe taking over, a Miramar and
so pardon the mixed metaphor, but I think that ship has sailed. I mean, in 2006, the voters voted about Miramar, voted on that. It didn't pass.
They had the big shot then.
And I think ultimately, because you're right, this has been going on for a long time, I think everybody said, enough is enough. Let's just make the airport work with the runway that we have, the one runway that we have. Maybe not in our lifetime, maybe in the way, way distant future, but not now. This is a 2050 plan, and I don't think you're going to see a new airport between now and 2050.
And there's still lots of opposition to expanding the capacity and more passengers and more planes. Mostly those folks are under the flight pattern 95% of the time. When the plane's taken off over the ocean, they must not be keen on all of this, eh?
Yeah, interestingly, they didn't show up, but they submitted letters to the airport authority protesting spending money when they feel that the airport authority hasn't adequately addressed noise issues. The airport authority points out that it's not this project that's going to create more noise. It's the inevitable passengers who will come. But they are expanding their mitigation program, where they have a sound insulation program that maybe more people can get, better doors and windows to insulate against the noise. But there's only so much they can do.
You got a plane flying over your
house. I don't know that the neighbors are ever going to be happy with that.
This is just kind of the con to having an airport right next to downtown, where so many people are living and visiting, that it's a convenient location for a lot of people to get to, but it's not friendly to those who are actually with ears.
No, I know, and I don't think that opposition dissidence is going to go away.
Almost out of time. What's next, the timetable?
Oh, right. So they hope to break ground by the end of next year, but they need to get federal approval of a federal level environmental impact report. They need California Coastal Commission approval, and they need to hire a designer and a contractor to build it and to actually design what it's really going to look like. So they think all that's going to take considerable time, but they hope the first phase will open in 2024.
All right, a lot more to talk about as we move forward on that story. Well, we're going to move on. California's double-barreled crises, the climate change and housing shortages that we talk about all the time, is the focus of a single bill in Sacramento. Senate Bill 50 has attracted a lot of controversy, so much so that it was removed and amended by its author, State Senator Scott Wiener. And here he is last April introducing this bill.
Hyperlow density zoning, often in the form of banning and prohibiting all forms of housing other than single-family homes, makes it impossible for California to close our massive 3.5 million home deficit.
And so, Andrew, SB 50, it fundamentally shifts much of the power to decide what type of housing is built where, from localities to the state. What are the key aspects of this bill?
So SB 50 would require local governments, that's cities and counties, to offer developers a bonus when a piece of land and where they want to build is close to a major transit stop or close to a major job center. So it would require cities to allow 4 to 5 story mid-rise apartment buildings. They wouldn't allow, they couldn't put restrictions on the number of parking spaces or other kind of restrictions on density for that piece of land. The premise of the bill is basically that cities and local governments who have a lot of authority over land use in California have failed to plan for enough housing to accommodate California's growing population and our growing economy. And so the state needs to step in and require cities to actually upzone that land near public transit, where people, we all acknowledge that the growth has to be concentrated so that people will get out of cars and have more mobility other than, that very carbon-intensive transportation that we rely on.
Put an end to sprawl. That's the whole idea. Well, your story notes a broad coalition supports SB 50, and who are some of the folks backing this?
Yeah, so it's some strange bedfellows getting behind this bill. So you have the California Chamber of Commerce and the California Labor Federation. You have the developer lobby, the Building Industry Association, and the construction worker unions, groups representing seniors, the AARP, groups representing the UC San Diego students, environmental groups. So there's it's basically a who's who of interest groups in Sacramento. But it has come up against a lot of opposition as well, both from equity groups concerned with its impacts on gentrification and groups that want to preserve local government's authority over land use, and a lot of homeowners and neighborhood associations that like the neighborhoods that they live in the way that they are and they don't want them to change.
Yeah, one of the main groups, according to your story, Livable California, and they call it unprecedented taking of local planning powers, hands city and community decision making directly to luxury housing developers, provides no help for cities to recover from developers' disruption, low-income neighborhoods, and it goes on. Is it accurate? Is this group telling the truth on all this?
Well, it's a statement of opinion, certainly, and they represent, a significant portion of Californians who don't want to see a lot of growth in the state and want things to, grow at least a lot more slowly or not grow at all. To add some context to that, Senator Wiener has been working with a lot of those equity groups representing low-income neighborhoods and has changed the bill to accommodate some of their requests. So if a piece of land has ever had a tenant living on that piece of land, a developer would not be able to demolish a building and use this bill to then displace those people. He's got a 5-year exemption for sensitive communities that are at particular risk of gentrification. He's got low-income housing inclusionary requirements, so a developer would have to include some low-income units in their projects or pay a fee. And I think where Livable California is coming from is that doesn't apply to projects with 10 units or fewer. So, you can argue over the scale, but I don't think it's accurate to say it would do nothing to increase affordable housing. Several independent groups and outside observers have said it would actually increase affordable housing writ large in California.
Lori?
So let's say, for argument's sake, this were to go through. I'm kind of skeptical that how are they going to enforce this, because we know that for decades the state has a mandated housing plan that cities and counties have to comply with, that they have to accept so many units of housing. Rarely do those housing units ever get built. There seems to be little enforcement or power to enforce that. And now you're getting into an even more difficult kind of thing to enforce. How can that even happen if it were to be approved?
I think you're right. When we look back over the past several decades, the state's Housing Accountability Act has been pretty toothless, but those laws have been changing. And we do have now another bill for a bill that became law from Senator Wiener, SB 35, that requires cities to approve a project by right. Without, a vote at a city council, let's say, if it meets certain conditions, meets the zoning requirements. So there are a lot of moving parts when it comes to the state actually telling cities and counties what the rules are. And, enforcement, it's certainly possible that cities could just give the middle finger to Sacramento and say, we're not going to follow this, but that's where the courts have to step in and say, no, this is the law, and we're going to enforce it.
And I would say it does seem like there's a lot of elected officials, and especially in larger cities, that maybe philosophically would like to allow the density, but politically are afraid to. This gives them cover.
Exactly, and this is something that we've heard from Senator Wiener. He says he talks to a lot of city council members and mayors saying, please pass this bill because I don't want the decision-making authority. When I'm faced with a vote, I don't want the
homeowners yelling at me.
Yeah, when I have to vote on whether or not to approve this big project in a neighborhood, it would be a whole lot easier if I could just point the finger up at Sacramento and say they made me do it. Now, we have to take him at his word that those conversations are happening, but it does kind of track, I think, with the way that housing politics works in California.
Well, let's look at the power broker here, Senate Leader Pro Tem TONI Atkins of San Diego here. We're going to listen to what she says about why this law is needed.
If you say you care about homelessness and rising rents and your grandparents and your parents and your children who are becoming adult age and want to remain in California, if you say you care about those things, then you have to be part of the solution to figure out how we plan it and do it appropriately. There's no getting around it if you want California to continue to be economically viable and a place where people want to live.
All right, almost out of time in this segment, but development today out of Atkins' office, I mean, it's far from the finish line.
Yes,
right?
We're speaking on Friday. This morning, she basically moved it out of the Appropriations Committee, which is where it got put on hold last year. It creates a different pathway or more options for this bill to actually survive and get to a floor vote on the Senate. So certainly something to watch, and probably one of the biggest bills that legislators will be debating in Sacramento this year.
And you were at Mayor Faulkner's last State of the City address, and he talked about his complete communities plan, some of the elements in common with this, right? Speaking of mayors of cities.
Yeah, so Mayor Faulkner has not endorsed this bill, and we should be clear, neither has Senator Atkins. She's not a co-author, although she has spoken in support of it, kind of in general terms. But Mayor Faulkner has this plan called Complete Communities. It has similar goals to SB 50, intensifying the land use around public transit stops and raising height limits and density limits. It would also require developers to set aside more affordable housing and pay for infrastructure improvements in that neighborhood. So it's a bit of a push and give and take situation. It doesn't necessarily address the baseline zoning of what would be allowed in each in those areas. But Faulkner is kind of in line with the principles behind SB 50, but we haven't seen an endorsement from him.
All right, lots to follow up on, a lot more reporting to come on that. It's a fascinating story. Well, we're going to move on. It's easy, maybe tempting, to simply step onto an MTS trolley coach without bothering to pay the fare. A few years ago, chances were low that a transit officer would come down the aisle and ask to see your ticket. Not anymore. So, Josh, we'll start with this remarkable spike and how many citations are now being issued, and when did it start? What are the numbers?
2017. I got them right here.
Pull them up off your phone.
So in 2016, it was like 25,000 citations a year. But then in 2017, that shot up to more than 45,000 citations a year. And then in 2018, 61,000 citations. And we don't have the final numbers for 2019 yet, but it looks like it's tracking roughly about the same as it was in 2018, maybe even a little higher.
They're getting writer's cramp out there writing the citations. And how does that compare with other cities? It's really spiked here as nowhere else, huh?
Yeah, it does seem like we are writing more tickets than a lot of other cities are writing, even when you look at other transit systems that are open access, right? That's where you don't have to go through a turnstile. You just hop on, and then you have to check the fare proactively after the fact, like we do in San Diego.
Now, your story notes, though, that the fare evasion rate steadied for several years at about 3%. So what's behind this huge increase in the...
Yeah, and maybe we should just explain the fare evasion rate and how they come up with that, because it does seem a little odd that stays the same even though we're handing out more tickets, right?
Why a crackdown when there doesn't seem to be?
Yeah, so they do these surveys where they try to figure out how many people are not paying, which includes the number of citations they're handing out, which is roughly 1% of every interaction. But then they also track how many people are jumping off the trolley when they get on. And when they figure all this out, they figure about 3% of people are on the trolley not paying for it. And that's been pretty steady, right? But what happened was in 2007, they changed the whole way that they handed out the citations. And then that's what really drove it up. So it used to be that you'd have a security guard on there, a contracted security guard. And then if they found someone who wasn't paying their fare, they'd have to call a separate person in called a code compliance officer. And this is someone that MTS employs that has to go through state training. And then they'd have to come, find the person, and write the ticket.
And sit there awkwardly while they wait.
A lot of times the security guards were detaining people for 10, 15, 30 minutes at a time. So they made this change in 2017 where they hired more of the code compliance officers. They actually scaled back the number of security guards that they were contracting with, so it was budget neutral. And they created this beat system where the security guards and the inspectors are going out together now on trolleys, and they
write them on the spot.
They can write the citation right there.
Yeah. Lori?
So your story pointed out that there's a lot of people getting ticketed who can ill afford to pay the fines. So do you have a sense of how many people are actually paying? Is this a fool's errand, or are there a substantial amount of people who are just getting the citations, they're not paying, and they're never collecting money?
Yeah, I don't think we know how many people that get citations are poor or homeless. We don't really have that data, as far as I know.
I recall hearing some discussion at the MTS board of directors saying that, fare officers have some discretion when they want to, take a passenger's word for it, that maybe they forgot to tap their card. They've got a monthly pass, but they didn't tap it, so it's not activated. There's some displeasure from the elected officials who oversee MTS about who they let off with a warning, and other folks that they're more strict with and actually will write the citation.
Got to pay the fine.
They have a ton of discretion over that. I've been out with the trolley enforcement groups a number of times now, and yeah, they can decide whether or not to write someone a ticket. And a lot of times they just have to go on the person's story. Did they really forget to tap? Because our system is this open access system. People have to tap before they get on. They can have a whole bunch of excuses, right? So the guards do have the officers really do have a lot of discretion over that. But we don't know how many people are indigent that are getting the tickets. Although a bunch of the people that told me that I went out with said it's actually a very small amount. Now, that's just anecdotal.
Now, our colleague Lisa Halverstad of Voice of San Diego has written about this as well, and you both point out it's not cheap to pay this citation, and it snowballs, right?
Yeah, totally. So the first one you get, when you factor in all the court fees, is $193, and it goes up from there. Your second citation, here, I'll just read it here, is $280. Third is $450, and if you don't pay it, it goes to collections, and they tack on another $315 on top of that. So yeah, we're talking hundreds of dollars. And the idea is, if we're giving this to people who are indigent or homeless, it just makes it harder for them to rise out of poverty. And we're not the only ones talking about this. There are cities across the country that are talking about criminalizing poverty, and how in New York they have a huge crackdown on fare evasion on the subway
it,
system, and they've had a lot of pushback saying, hey, this is not something that really is good for society as a whole.
And there's something that, if you don't pay a toll in a toll road, the penalties are much lower than if you fail to pay a fare for public transit, right?
Okay, so that this is like a criminal thing, and so what MTS is talking about now is making it civil and bringing it in-house, creating like a trolley court or a transit court similar to what LA Metro is done, so that you wouldn't have all the court fees, and they could have more discretion on helping people out who are homeless. And so that's something that's in the works, but definitely the MTS board is looking at ways to address this right now.
All right, a few seconds left here before we're out of time, but a lot of revenue for MTS, of course, comes from fares.
Yeah,
right?
a third.
A third.
Yeah, so I mean, pretty substantial.
It's not insignificant. It's got to be enforced.
Totally, yeah. And since they've been enforcing, crime is down. With this new beat system, pairing the security guards with the code compliance inspectors, we have seen a drop in crime on board the trolley. So a lot of people like this.
All right. Well, another good one to watch as we go forward here. It's fascinating stuff. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. And I'd like to thank my guests, Lori Weisberg and Joshua Emerson Smith, both of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Andrew Bowen of KPBS News. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today, and join us again next Friday on the Roundtable.